maximize every opportunity so that you can become legendary.
What adjustments can you make right now to make yourself 1%
Your
better?
only goal is to be the best version of you.
Cory, welcome to Becoming Legendary, man. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good. Good. Thanks for having me.
Good. Can you just give me, the audience, everybody, just kind of a 30-second, 60-second breakdown of who you are, and let's run from there?
Sure. I am a human person that, my work basically focuses on intentional shifts of consciousness, increasing self-awareness to understand yourself and the world more clearly so that you can live a more intentional life, which then, of course, naturally evolves into a life that is more peaceful and kind and compassionate and so forth. I've really whittled it down to, with all the things I'm doing, they're all interrelated, whether that would be writing, like my book, Now Is the Way, my meditation courses, Coming Home or Releasing to Now, my podcast, The Astro Hustle, my music, the binaural beats, all those different things are all really leading and connected to the same thing. They're just different modalities of trying to achieve that. And the shortest way that I have whittled that down is trying to get people to calm down and wake up. That's what all of that stuff's trying to do. Get people to just relax and take a breath, stop, get a little bit closer to the present so that their mind has the space to expand and become more aware.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah.
a lot of good stuff there. All right. So I want to take this idea of waking up really quick, because waking up's been around for a while, right? We were talking about waking up in the 60s.
couple of thousand years. Yeah.
But I think there was also a different energetic component to a certain subculture, at least in that 60s wake up, where it was also drop out, right? It was like, hey, tune in and check out what's going on cosmically, and then within society, stop playing by society's rules. How does your version of waking up compare to some of the previous versions?
Oh, I think really just in the word wake. I mean, like what I'm talking about doesn't really have much to do with that in a lot of ways. The hippified version of it was very much based on, as you said, somehow stepping backward out of society so that you could begin to live life on your own terms, which is great. They didn't touch as much on the practical and fundamental aspects of what that actually does for you. How is it actually useful and deployable in real life whenever you begin to think for yourself, to think more broadly, to think with more self-awareness? It was very much kind of getting the sword out of the stone. That was that generation's contribution. I think now it's had time to become more fine-tuned and nuanced. And in my view, in this current day and what I'm trying to do, it's about taking what's already been established as far as realizing that you can live life in your own way, realizing that you can think in different ways. But then instead of just allowing that to lead to delusion, which, I mean, generations of people use that information of, turn on and drop out, and lived horrible lives that were lost, full of suffering, because they, got sucked into a type of either metaphysical or psychological delusion of some sort and sort of misread the situation, because a lot of that stuff, it was sold through the romanticization of drugs or whatever, a different type of cultural change, which is whatever it is. But it didn't come with the actual tools and information of like, hey, so if you're going to be doing this, you should think about these things, so that you don't really basically just swap one religion for another. Ultimately, the religion of the 1940s and 50s culture that was patriarchal and industrial and capitalist and all this, You know, it's essentially that's the religiosity of a country, you know, in its essence. And so this was just in a lot of ways switching one for another, and that still happens now with people who get way drawn into metaphysical and new age stuff, you know. So I think that to me, you know, what's important with the notion of quote unquote waking up, and I actually never really used that word. I just used it in this regard because it was rather, it's a short and pithy way to say calm down and wake up, you know. But whenever I say waking up now, I mean ultimately becoming, well, ultimately is becoming aware of your own awareness, recognizing the witness mind, becoming aware of the one inside your mind that is observing your thoughts and your identity and yourself and all of the mental formations that flow by within your experience of life. And then being able to understand what you're experiencing as you're experiencing it more quickly, more clearly, so that as your impulses, your reactions, all of this conditioned behavior that we have in us begins to arise, you are able to be aware of those things as they're arising and take some authorship over how you exist in the world, how you react to people, what you say to people, the choices that you make. And that intentionality is actually where freedom comes from. And to me, that is what waking up means. And that's what my goal is to try and share with people.
On the note of authorship over your own life, because I think that's a pretty fascinating concept that certainly I think is probably misunderstood and significantly underappreciated. What percentage of the story do you think we have the capacity to write?
You mean like in terms of free will?
Oh, I mean in terms of how much of your own destiny do you think you have the potential to influence or control?
I mean, if you're looking for like a percentage, I would say,
yeah.
I would call it 30%. And I'm just coming up with this as we're talking here because you asked me the question, but maybe perhaps it's 30% of the circumstances and influences of your life since you were born. We're always working either against or with that in some way. And a lot of it is it's set in stone, you know, who you are, where you were born, what you look like, what your family and the culture that you were born into, the time that you were born, as far as the year, you know, all of that stuff dictates so much of who we are. And there's nothing we can do to avoid that. So that's part of it. That's predetermined by chance. And then there is the other 30%. Of course, we're looking at 33.3%, but I'm just using nice round numbers. The other 33% is the landscape of the existential situation. So it's just like the self-organizing chaos of nature has its say, because we are a content, you know, a piece on the chessboard of that thing. We can't control that at all. That's just happening, and we're a part of that. And that's a beautiful thing that it's happening, because without that, obviously, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Nothing would exist. So we have our conditioned, you know, inherited behavior and mind and what have you. We have the nature, and then the other 30%, I think we have the potential to have say and have that authorship, because that's all of like who's making the decisions, who is the one in the mind that's making these choices, deciding how you're going to live, how you're going to respond to some of those other things I talked about. And, you know, ultimately that 30% of mind, I don't believe is really free in most people. I mean, most people are perhaps, because we get caught in this momentum of doing and distraction, and really many people are living on autopilot, and they're just reacting to one scenario after another and trying to kind of manage it all, because it takes a lot of energy and a lot of effort to be a person and to get through life. And people don't have the tools. They haven't been shown how to stop and to slow down and to begin to think about, like, what am I doing? Like, who am I being? How am I existing in the world? How do I want to be? What are the other possibilities? And so within that, you know, that percentage of possibility that we could have some say, it becomes a gradient as to how much effort you put in to take control of that part of who you are and get off of autopilot and start flying the meat plane yourself,
And that 30% that you're talking about, mindfulness, awareness, the things that you teach, the things that you practice so inherently in your life, those practices allow you then to create and sort of manifest in the way that you desire. Correct?
Yeah. I mean, I am careful with the word manifest.
Yeah.
But
that's fair.
So I like to look at it as self-imprintation or setting an intention, so it's like, as you do those things, you can get a sense of, I would like to be more this way in my life. And you set that as an intention. You set that as some way of like, okay, that's going to be something I will affirm even. I'm going to make that as a goal to do that and to watch that. And then you can notice the things that get in the way of you behaving that way, or the parts of yourself that are resistant to working in that way. And as those things arise and create conflict, and you feel the tension of that conflict, you can then have a goal to work towards. And that's a really, powerful thing, because a lot of times people have this nebulous conceptual idea of like, oh, I'd like to be happier. It's like, well, that's great, but what does that mean? What does it look like for you to be happy, for you to be peaceful? And someone says, I want to be a more compassionate person. Well, how would that show up in life? How does it look like whenever you're a more compassionate person? What are you actually doing? Because a lot of people, what happens is they mistake a moment of contemplation for action. And that's a big one. So someone says, I want to be more kind or something. And they think, all right, I'm going to be a more kind person. And they go on thinking that, but then they don't really do it that often, but they're thinking about doing it. And they think, no, that's something I want to do. But they don't end up really, when the rubber hits the road, when they're out there, they're still generally acting and reacting in the same way in life that they had before. And it's a really slippery one, because we get stuck in this contemplation state of imagining how we'd like to change. And it feels like we're actually working on something, because it's this idea that's going around in our head. But as far as if you were being observed from the outside, you're not really changing. So you get into this weird egoic feedback loop of creating ornaments for your own identity, essentially. So you're just labeling your idea of self with these like gentle, fluffy, like warm platitudes, but you're not really getting anywhere. And a lot of people stay in that state of contemplation for quite a long time. And then what happens is that then they get frustrated, because like, no, I'm being this person. Why isn't the world kind of changing? Why aren't my relationships changing? It's like, well, because you actually haven't really done anything.
There's no intention behind it.
Yeah.
That's a great point. The intention versus the manifestation it's a word that you clarified that for me, huge. So I'm trying to thank you here. But there's
sure.
the intention piece for me is something I often use and often try to focus on to make change and to bring the things in my life that I want. So clarifying that little piece really helped me, man. Thank you.
Oh, good. Oh, sure. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that is one of the good things that I've learned after doing the podcast for so long, is how people take words whenever I don't expect it. And that's the curse of knowledge as a writer, right? Because you're so familiar with the concept, you write something and you expect, oh, this is crystal clear. But you only are aware of that because you're the one that thought of it. And there's huge chunks of missing information. So you give that to someone else, and I don't understand this. And this is called the curse of knowledge. But we have that all the time. And it really shows up on podcasting too, where you're talking about something particularly about something as ephemeral as what we're talking about now, like consciousness shifts, states of mind, and awareness. The words that one uses to describe those things, I've just over the years become really precise about it, because there's been so many times, just hundreds and hundreds of occasions over the last 7 years, where people email me and say, hey, that sounds great, I'm going to go join the alien cult or whatever. And I'm like, I'm not sure how you got that out of what I was talking about, but I'd like to be more precise and stuff so that doesn't happen anymore, because I'm trying to get people away from delusion, not closer to it.
There. Thank you for that.
It's very clear that you have a very rational cognitive process. Is that something that has really been ingrained in you throughout your existence here, or is that something that has been ratcheted up on this current path?
I've always had that path. It really started off as being rooted in skepticism. Like whenever I was a teenager, it was just a lot of hardcore anti-authority, hardcore skepticism, hardcore intellectual narcissism, and basically being like, it was my defense mechanism against my bad environment and not having any like real parental figures. That was, I need to try and show like a intellectual dominance or ability to strategically unpack what someone else is thinking or saying in a way so that I feel comfortable, so that I don't feel threatened by them, and that they feel a little either insulted or deflated or put into a position of, beta-ness in this way, so that I could feel comfortable, because I was so anxious, uncomfortable, and had zero like self-belief or feelings of love or anything. And so I use that as a tool, as a crutch, in an unhealthy way throughout my teens and early 20s. And then fortunately, the natural proclivity for that type of systematic thinking was able to grow as I worked at it longer and longer, grow into something really positive. So at the beginning, it was just a really gnarly defense mechanism, but it eventually blossomed into something that was, to me, I think has become incredibly valuable for me, and a good way to help take really abstract ideas that are hard for people to conceptualize and break them down, explain them in these fundamental, simple, linear ways that are easy to digest. It's become a helpful tool, for me, and I think for other people.
It's you and Patrick have something largely in common here. He has the same ability to do that. It's something I find a lot of comfort in as a friendship and as a business partner. It's something that really helps to create forge that human bond, right? That really bleeds through some of the garbage that exists out there most times.
Yeah.
I think it's rare. So that you have a really interesting rare combination, Cory, because I think that rational cognitive process and capacity to communicate, especially communicate on a large scale, are pretty infrequently within the Venn diagram.
Yeah, there's not a lot of poetic engineers out there.
Yeah.
No.
Were you equally skilled? Did you always have this gift of communication, or has that been something that you have crafted over this 7-year journey?
Yeah, actually, whenever I was a child, I didn't talk to anyone until I was 4. I would talk to my mom and my brother a little bit. Yeah. And then I was really quiet throughout elementary school, super shy, super just kind of inward, and didn't really interact with people too much. And then as I got into, to further on in school, I was still really closed off, but then with certain people, I would be really open. And that's whenever the language started really happening, because I was always just, even as a kid, I was just stuck in my head all the time. And so I was like articulating the things in a little, as a little kid would. But then as I got older, I learned how to outwardly express it. And so the what I learned was too much detail and at some point, but all of that started happening. And then whenever got to be about 18 or 19, I would talk to people. A lot of people that I talked to just randomly, they would ask me if I was a writer. That's where I started recognizing that people were recognizing, because I wasn't really aware that it was anything unusual, because it was just how I thought and how I talked. But whenever people continuously were saying, "Are you a writer?" But no, I'm a musician. And then I started realizing, oh, okay, there's a reason why people are asking me this. It must means that I don't know, maybe it was the way I dressed. No, I must be articulating things well. Like, this guy's got a scarf on, and,
got the beret.
Black coat.
Yeah.
I feel you, man.
Smoking like loose, freshly rolled cigarettes, drinking espresso. Yeah.
And walking around with a typewriter. But other than that, no, that is that is a very cool gift. And I think that it is clear that you have a very unique perspective. And what I have started to identify is the more unique your perspective, the less likely it is that you have the capacity to communicate that perspective. Because you have further to go, right? There's a larger distance to travel before you can get back to the perspective. So the more atypical you are on that spectrum, the more you are going to have to work to get back towards that middle of that communication spectrum. And that is a pretty fascinating thing to do. So is there anything that you have? Well, so I'm curious to know how or if you've experienced an influence from your capacity to communicate or your ability to articulate your own internal workings from your experience of working on your internal. So how has the meditation practice itself impacted your capacity to communicate externally?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's clarified what my actual thoughts and ideas are. It's made it to where I'm really aware of what I'm thinking and why I'm thinking it, and how the different parts of that idea are interconnected. Writing is also really useful for that too. That's because whenever we have a concept, we think that it's huge. We think that it's crystal clear. And it's really just this opaque cloud that's in our mind with not much shape, but it feels really exciting. It's the excitement of having an idea that often blinds us to the idea itself and what it really is and what we're actually thinking. Interestingly, like, next time that you have a great idea and you get really excited about it, start writing about it. And before you write about it, you're going to think about, how much can I write? I could write 5 pages about this. And you sit down, and most people will start writing and they'll get about 2 sentences. And they go, oh, well, I felt like the idea was a lot bigger than that. But the second I started writing, I kind of couldn't tell what the idea really was. I had, wasn't as sure what was going on there. And that's because so much of that, the feeling of what we're thinking overwhelms what we're actually thinking a lot of times, because we get so enamored by the sense that we have an idea, right? So all that to say that meditation is really valuable, because it allows me to, or has allowed me to, gain clarity on what I'm actually thinking, instead of getting lost in the enthusiasm of the energy of having thought something.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. That's a fun. I think that actually rolls right back to the how we kind of started down this thread, right? Which was your explanation of people getting stuck in the capacity to think about making improvements, because the dopamine hit is essentially just the dopamine hit. Most of the dopamine hit is within the thought, right? We can get stuck within the within the initial workings of the thought, about 90% of your dopamine hit comes from the like researching and thinking about purchasing something. And it's
Right.
that last 10% where you're like, well, this wasn't that great.
Yeah. If you look at, if you look at even addictive behavior, it's all the craving is where all the dopamine is released, not the actual acquisition of whatever we're craving. It's pretty fascinating to me.
That is
Yeah.
interesting. So you mentioned something about feeling and being, right? So I'm a yoga teacher, same with Patrick, and there's an expression I use oftentimes in my classes that goes something like this. This is when we're connecting to our breath, we're doing the breath awareness practice at the beginning of our class. I often say this is a great opportunity to start to shift from thinking and doing to feeling and being. And the breath is that gateway or that portal to that feeling and being sort of expression or expression basically. So in your own life, besides meditation, is there another practice that you use that gets out of your rational thinking mind and doing mind into that feeling and being state, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, it also must be in the air because I just wrote a Instagram post about thinking or the being and the doing mind just a few hours ago.
That's right.
It's kind of random or not.
Yeah, or not exactly.
Yeah, I feel for me that I found a nice way to exist in both of those places at once. So that's sort of just where I am at all the time, is a combination of both of those things, and they flex in and out when necessary, just adapting to whatever the situation is. So sometimes whenever people ask me what my favorite hobby is, I say, just standing in the backyard looking at the middle distance. That's my kind of just staring into nothingness. That's my favorite hobby, laying on the couch and staring at the ceiling for 2 hours, because my default state is being, and I'm really happy there. But the doing is also something that obviously is necessary and is a lot of fun too. But I've just, I suppose, worked at it to where both of those things just coexist. And really, to be a bit more precise about it, in the original classical mindfulness training in the Satipatthana Sutra, the clarification on what the goal of mindful awareness is not a either laser focused type of state where you're hyper focused on this or this or this or this or this, nor is it where you are completely expanded into spotlight awareness, where you're simply aware of all of the totality of the picture. It's described as if you're standing in a field and you're staring at a single tree in a field from a distance. Your awareness should be attuned equally to the field and to the tree. So you find the relative space between the being and doing, essentially, because you're aware of the spotlight and the floodlight, the flashlight view at the same time. And interestingly, having spoken with many of the neuroscientists that are leading the research in this study, in this field, they've said that what happens to your brain is that it actually grows to change to help nurture that type of relationship with reality. And it begins to be able to very naturally and very quickly slide back and forth between either of those states, but its resting state is in a state of, suppose, calm readiness for either of those detail or large states to kick in. But it's through, a long dedicated meditation practice and mindfulness practice that type of brain state arises. So it's really fascinating to me. And that's generally, where I am. And to Patrick's question, I mean, the main thing that's going to help with that is just daily meditation practice.
There's a meditation that is coming through right now for me, and I think this is. I've tried. I like to practice. I like to do meditation in a sauna, which adds a layer of uncomfortableness to the experience, and it gives me an opportunity to allow the uncomfortableness to cross past my awareness, like a cloud passing on a clear blue sky.
Yeah, sure.
But there's this meditation that I also like to practice. I'm not sure what the name of it is, but I'm just going to entitle it single point meditation. And it's where you almost like what you're describing in the tree in the field analogy, is that you find a point in the distance. It could be a speckle, or it could be something larger, and then your focus is on that thing in the distance. But then you're also the meditation comes being focused, and then also being focused on everything else around it at one time. Whether you see something move through your field of vision, or a tree flickers, or a light flashes, like whatever it may be, sort of being aware of it all and nothing at the same time.
Yeah. I love that. I used to do that in my 20s. What I would do every night is I got this package of, those wedding candles that are like those 1-inch little white candles. Like you see them at weddings, or they put them on tables or whatever.
Sure.
I would buy one of the giant package of those, and then every night I would light one, and I would use the flame as the point of focus.
Yes.
And then the session would last for as long until the actual candle burned out.
That's
and It
cool.
was really trippy, because you probably experienced this. It's actually one of, believe the second stage of Jhana meditation practice is what you're talking about. And what happens is that the area around the focal point begins to stretch and get weird, and like, like it almost looks like, reality is kind of bending, and what have you. Have you ever experienced that while you're doing that practice?
Yes.
Yeah, it's pretty trippy, isn't it?
That is trippy. It then starts to distract me away from the practice.
Mhm.
So it's that toggling back and forth. Like it's the rational mind coming back. Is this really happening? Is the flame getting bigger? Is it now engulfed the whole room? And then it's like, whoa, shift back to the, so that's also the game that you're playing as well.
Yeah. The point of that traditionally is to build what's called access concentration. So access concentration is building a one-pointedness of mind that is impervious to distraction. So an impervious sounds outwardly aggressive. It's more of the acceptance of material data moving through mind, and simply being able to continue on with, and this is where the subtlety comes in, being able to be engaged with it without trying to assert any control over it. So the other form of access concentration, this is really fun, and people think this is really easy, and they sort of shake it off. But, if they actually were to try it in earnesty and be honest with themselves, they'll find how difficult it is. And that is just in your meditation, just paying attention to your breath, right? Just moving in and out, and having your focus pointed on your breath, but not controlling it at all. So in the same way, this entire time that you both have been breathing, you haven't been thinking about your breath probably at all, maybe a second here or there, because it's been completely automatic, right? Involuntary. Now, can you do that with your attention pointed at your breath moving in and out? That's a really fun practice. That's another part of building access concentration.
Yeah, there's those 3 points to that. There's the breath practice. There's the awareness of it. There's the manipulation or the control of it, and then there's the witness of it. It's those 3 pieces. Dan Brule talks a lot about those three particular arenas of your breath that allow you to access sort of deeper states of consciousness, if you will.
Yeah, and what's interesting is it's the contradictory engaging while letting go at the same time.
Yes. Always work there.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah, definitely. I enjoyed that air on a podcast, honestly. I mean,
No,
It's-
dead air is not a problem.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
The
absolutely.
where we head is an interesting thing. And I think this is a fair question. So this is a question that we ask to an awful lot of guests. And I have no guess as to where you're going to go with this. So I'm super excited.
Well, neither do I. We'll find out together.
That's it.
If you were to describe the internal experience of your meditation, so without anything that we could perceive externally, what would differentiate your meditation from thinking with your eyes closed?
Well, a meditation is active in a different way than just thinking with my eyes closed. So thinking with my eyes closed would be just allowing the default mode network to go wild and just have all of the fractal of thoughts and randomness that's detoxing through my this across the stage of my mind just to go wild, and to have no real focus or intention or point about what I'm doing. It's almost just dreaming while you're awake in some ways. To me, meditation is very specific and very intentional in whatever dimension I'm taking it in at that point. And I mean dimension as in whatever type of practice, no, not whatever universal dimension, not a cosmic dimension. And so it really depends on what I'm doing in that moment, because I have a lot of different variety of techniques that I practice depending on whatever I'm feeling or what I want to work towards. And sometimes working towards something is working towards nothing. And so, in short, or I suppose medium by this point, thinking with my eyes closed is just completely random and rather frivolous and free. And meditation is very focused, and there's a process that's happening there, and there's a linear experience that is unfolding that I am deepening throughout the course of that meditation session. So my consciousness is changing from the beginning all the way into the end, and I'm aware of that change, and I'm guiding that change.
So tell me if this is wrong, but if my condensed understanding, I don't know. It sounds like what you're saying is you feel like it is the conscious attunement of the direction of your thought processes.
I guess my thoughts don't really have much to do with my meditation, though.
Well, yeah. So I like that. So where's the directional influence coming from? Because like the capacity to direct seemed like it was a very tangible piece of that experience.
Mm-hmm.
So what is being directed, and where is that directional component coming from?
Yeah, again, it depends on the specific thing I'm doing, but typically the direction is coming from from I am, from the witness mind, from the meditator, the one behind it all, whatever word you want to put on there. What's being directed is the contents of consciousness. And so there is the witness mind, and then what we could call consciousness, and then what we could call awareness, and then what we could call the contents of consciousness. And then in front of that, there are thoughts. And so I'm working from the back of all of that to a lot of times just move all of that aside. move everything in front of that aside, including the labeling of identity and self and purpose and meaning and all of those things. That's, traditionally what happens in meditations for me. But again, it just depends on what my aim is at that particular time, because I like to have a large toolkit of meditation techniques that I really enjoy. And so, I just direct it based off of that. I could walk you through if I don't know, we have about another 20 minutes or something, but I could not do a guided meditation, but I could just kind of talk through a sequence if you like, if you want to go into that. I mean, it's could get a little complicated and be long-winded. We can also save that and we can move on to something else. But
no, we've teased it now.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Absolutely. I'm like, please. Just make it 19 minutes. We only got 20 minutes left.
yeah.
Just kidding.
I just don't know how useful it will be for people who listen to this with limited amount of explanation. But so here's, for example, a typical meditation that I would enjoy doing would be starting with just calming the body, spending a few minutes just relaxing the body, shaking off all of the tension, resetting, setting your breath, relaxing the muscles in your face, and beginning that physical stabilization. Then I would begin to pay attention to my breath and practice what we talked about earlier, building up the access concentration of observing my breath, allowing it to move involuntarily while focused on it. And that takes my consciousness and my internal world to a place that is let go and deeper into the acceptance of what is internally, while remaining very sharply focused in mind. Then after that, I would move to some other type of focusing practice. But definitely I would go to a quick compassion practice. So then after stabilizing the body, focusing on the breath, I would then go into a self-generative form of building internal compassion. And that typically is done by remembering a old memory that was a beautiful memory full of warmth and whatever it is, compassion, that gives you that good feeling. And this is a little trick that doctors hate that I came up with, that I would replay that memory over and over in mind, just the snapshot, like it's a piece of a movie, just replaying, and allow that feeling from it to build internally, and then detach the memory and the movie part of it, and just then continue to cycle up the feeling inside and allow it to grow and expand and move throughout the body. So now you have a stable body with a focused mind that has now been filled with a sense of compassion and kindness. And then I might there move to outwardly expressing that through a loving kindness or a metta type of meditation, sending that sense of compassion outward to other people, to all living beings or to one specific person. And then from there, I would, for example, move to observing my sense store information, all of the sounds and feelings of my skin, all of the information going into my senses. I would begin to observe all of that moving across the stage of my mind. Notice all of that data, because all of that stuff is really just, it's just other mental formations, just like thoughts are mental formations. Everything moving in through our sense stores is just information and data that is going through our nervous system and being passed across the stage of our mind, just like our thoughts are. And stepping back and observing the information passing through, and then zooming out a little bit so that there's space between the arising mental formations and the point of awareness. And so the informal nature of those things then becomes clear. And then from there, I would remove all of the conceptual labeling of information on all those mental formations. Some of you hearing, oh, there's these sounds, there's a dog barking, there's a bird outside, there is someone closing their car door outside, I'm smelling this smell, I am feeling this sensation of cool air on my skin. And stepping back from that, this is where the access concentration is valuable. Allowing the relationship to the information that's moving across the stage of your mind to truly be pulled away, so that you're only experiencing the raw data of those things without the conceptuality of it applied to it, the labeling of that information. For example, if this is sounding strange to someone that's listening to this, to clear that up a little bit, you would hear my voice right now, but instead of hearing words and sounds that are forming sentences that are conveying ideas, you would just be hearing the true nature of what my voice is. My voice is simply a resonant sound that's coming out of an organic resonance chamber. And all it really is just a sound that sounds like, that's really all my voice is. But we're applying all these concepts and these labels to the shapes of the sounds that I'm making, and we're creating meaning out of those things that actually isn't even real. It's just subjectively perceived by each of the people hearing the sounds to have a particular meaning, which is really only relevant to them, because all of their entire point of view and frame of reference for everything is all based on their past experiences and their relationship to what those concepts and words and ideas have, and then also their relationship to me and what they think I mean, and what the identity labels that they've placed on who I am, and the assumptions that they've made about me, and what mood I am in, and what I might be trying to say, and what if it relates to something I said earlier, and it just goes on and on and on. So anyway, getting into a meditative state of then releasing the signs, all the labels of all this information that's moving across, and then taking that to another level to where then the non-perception state begins. So this is where all of that information becomes textural, and you're getting closer to the true nature of reality. Because the true nature of reality is perceiving the objective universe without bias and with awareness of your biological bias, and reversing that even further to where now you're just experiencing this textural, non-perceptual version of awareness that is expanding. And then taking that back a step further to where then your own sense of identity and self becomes the target of the undressing of labeling and of signs and concepts. So the idea of I'm this person that thinks this way, that's doing these things, that has had X life, that means this and that and that, and letting all of that completely fall away in the same way that I did with the sense store information.
Mm.
That exposes the nature and liberates the nature of self from the story and the narrative that we have applied and others have applied to who we are supposed to be. And it allows you to observe and exist in a state of awareness free of the conceptual prison of identity. And then zooming that out even further, I would then, in that state of just observing awareness, a textural sense of non-self and of non-perception, I would then bring the compassion component back and bring the compassion component back in. And then I typically will reverse even further out to seeing my point of consciousness as a single candle flame that's burning. And then as I exhale, will extinguish that flame and be resting in what I call the state of home. That's why my new meditation course is called Coming Home, where it is pure awareness without delusion, yet right with not the idea, but the frequency. I like to call, these are also some kind of words that I make up just for myself. The frequency of compassion in that state. I call it tuning into the big frequency. You know,
Yeah.
sometimes before the after the removing the concepts of sense store information, sometimes I'll also do what is called draining the three poisons, which is anger and delusion and desire. And in the same way that you, as I described about my voice, about the sounds of it and having, you know, meaning and then having no meaning once you expose the true nature of the sound, also finding those three poisons within the self, the anger, and really examining, like, I'm feeling frustrated. What is anger? Why would, and like, it's an idea. It doesn't really even exist. It's a strange sensation. And my body is like this animal tuning fork that's resonating and reacting to my own mind or to the outside world and feeling frustration. Or why am I feeling desire and drawn to do certain things? Again, it's a complete delusion that controls our actions and, you know, takes away what is called freedom, you know, what's referred to as the freedom. They're all delusionary, you know, avidya types of things. And by applying that same system to them, you begin to really unpack them, and you can look deeper and deeper and deeper into what they are. And you realize that, well, often they just become sort of funny to me. And by shifting that perspective, and then intentionally, as you undress those those concepts, exhaling and feeling like they're draining out of you, and then I'd move on to the rest of it. That's like, it might be a typical meditation, but there's a lot of other things that I enjoy. But that's a sequence that I put together that I find really productive.
That was
Yeah.
that was good. That was a fun time. It's unfortunate we're up against the clock here, because I feel like we've just made it to the point where we found some real depth to this. But before we let you go, could you give us just a little bit of insight into your book, Now is the Way, an approach to modern mindfulness? Is that it?
That's close enough. Yeah.
Now is the Way, an approach to modern mindfulness.
Sure. Yeah, that works. Well, yeah, I think that subtitles are kind of lame anyway, honestly. Yeah,
Fair.
now is the way is basically it is a easy to understand guide to difficult ideas for mindfulness in the modern world. So the books on mindfulness have been around, of course, for decades. But at the time in 2018, whenever I was writing that one, I realized that there wasn't really a good one that took the ideas of mindfulness in a really direct and easy to understand and easy to apply way and applied them through my generation's language to our generation's problems of technology and the complication of the modern world and whatnot. And so that's what it is. And for example, like one of my favorite quotes in there is that talking about how our technology is evolving so much faster than our biology and how much tension it's causing is the juxtaposition of the fact that there are still hunter-gatherer tribes living in the Amazon whenever Amazon.com will deliver your groceries to your front door in 2 hours. That's the difference between our bodies and our technology that we're dealing with.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it was very true. That was very good. Brian, any last thoughts?
Just want to say, Cory, thanks for your time, man. I've just started to dive into your book more deeply, and one of my favorite things that made me feel really like I'm walking the right path. Like it kind of re-encouraged me to continue to take one step after the next down this path that I'm on. Is if you notice you are living mindlessly, you're actually succeeding living mindfully. So I'll say that again. If you notice you are living mindlessly, you're actually succeeding living mindfully. So that hit me right in the heart space, man. I appreciated that. I appreciate you. And dang, man, it was really nice to connect. That was by far the raddest meditation answer I've ever heard. So
Great.
thank you for sharing, your heart space with our audience. They will deeply resonate with this conversation. Thanks, man.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. And that I love that you pulled that quote. I think that's one of the more important ones in the entire book, because one of the things that I hear and have heard from hundreds of people, if not thousands of people, is that when they start looking inward and they begin to develop some of the tools of mindfulness and they begin meditating, they become aware of all of their negative habituation, all of their bad habits, the times when they say things that they hurt people's feelings, the time when they think things that are really mean and brutal, the times when they notice their minds getting into some weird Machiavellian planning strategy thing, and they start really feeling bad about themselves. And they think, oh man, like I'm not even worth trying to continue to grow, because look at all this horrible stuff I'm doing, even though I'm trying to grow past it and trying to work with it. But that's a big misnomer, because that is the maybe the biggest breakthrough that a person will have, because you went from complete unawareness to awareness. That's incredible, to be just going on autopilot and then recognizing all of these things. And of course, you just open the door to self-awareness. So of course the garden is going to be untended. You spent 25 years not tending the garden. And so then the job becomes tending the garden. So I love that. It's such an important one. I love that you pulled that. And thanks again for having me on the show. It was a lot of fun, guys.
Yeah, of course.
Appreciate the heck out of you, man.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cory. Have a rad weekend, man.
Yeah, you guys too.
Thank you.